By the time they reach their 70s, most Americans are receiving Social Security checks and enjoying the retirement they have dreamed about for decades, like living in a nice home in a choice location. But not Paula Leen. She receives Social Security, but to spend on others, not herself. In 1981, she accepted a call to be a secretary in the church's headquarters in Harare, Zimbabwe. While working there, she became aware that children attending an Adventist school in rural Marewo were starving after assistance from the government had been cut off. That same weekend, Paula went into action. She loaded her car with clothing, food, and supplies and headed for Marewo. Paula used clothing from Europe and the U.S. both to give people something to wear and to sell to meet basic needs. Giving a suit to a family could make it possible for a child to go to school, but that avenue was closed by the introduction of high tariffs.
I used to get containers of clothing. ADRA, most of the ADRA entities knew me. ADRA Sweden, ADRA Germany, ADRA the U.S., ADRA Canada, ADRA Australia. They were all sending me containers because they knew me to be an honest person. I was going all over the country giving clothes. But now you have to pay duty, and the duty is more than the value of the clothes in many cases, so it's a non-starter. And I find that really sad because there's a lot of need for clothes.
Paula was sent home by the division on permanent medical leave in 1990. But instead of retiring, she joined Swedish International Development Aid and later accepted a posting in Romania for 3 years with International Children's Care. But Africa never left her heart. She returned in 1997 to found the Zimbabwe Orphans Project, ZOP. Zimbabwe is known as Siberian Africa. Extreme poverty and starvation are everywhere, and HIV/AIDS stalks the land. It is a very risky place for Europeans and Americans to be. When asked why she stays in Zimbabwe, Paula replied simply,
because of the extreme needs. First of all, there's 80% unemployment in this country. That means there's that many people without jobs. There's no support unemployment like we would have in first world countries, so to speak. So we've got many destitute and many starving.
But it is the burgeoning orphan population that is never far from her mind.
This is Viso sitting right here. She's our little girl that has AIDS, but she looks quite healthy. When we got her, she was almost dead. She was very, very malnourished, and if we hadn't taken her at that time, before we even opened, she wouldn't have made it. She was with the auntie with 14 children, and now the auntie has 15. She could start her own country pretty soon.
To keep people in the area around her compound from starvation, it was clear that she needed much more food than she could buy. She needed her own gardens. But first, she had to establish a water supply. By trial and error, she built 7 dams, later stocked with fish, dug 20 wells and a borehole, and built storage tanks. With the produce from her model gardens and thousands of fruit trees, she pays for workers and has been feeding between 1,500 to 2,000 people for several years. The gardens are a source of wonder to people living in the area, but some supplies must still be purchased. An extraordinary problem is keeping abreast of inflation. In the first 5 months of 2006, inflation in Zimbabwe climbed 1,192%.
The wages are $120,000 for a 9-hour day. We work our workers 6 hours. We pay them $120,000, and we give them oil, and we give them sugar, and we give them clothes, and we give them other things to help them a little bit. But the costs are so extreme. 1 loaf of bread is $150,000. That's 7 hours labor. 2 kg of rice is $650,000. That's 32.5 hours labor. 1 cooking oil, which is 750 mils, which is an ordinary size bottle in America, is $450,000. That's 22.5 hours labor. 6 candles is $800,000. That's 40 hours to buy 6 candles.
Although Paula's Marewo program was doing much good, Her dream of establishing an orphanage where she can be a grandmother to many more orphans led her to a second location in 2006. Starting over again, Paula directed the planting of more gardens and 1,000 more fruit trees. There are so many mouths to feed.
Our nearest school, that's just a kilometer and a half away, we're feeding 211 children. That's the creche, the first grade, and the second grade. There is many in the upper grades that need feeding. Some of them are very malnourished. And we've asked that the head nurse at the clinic go and vet these because we cannot feed all 600 children, but we would pick out those that are really in urgent need of food. And then we have orphans here and our support team that comes to about 26. And then needy families within the large community that we're helping goes up to about 235. And they come for food once a month. We give them what we can. It's not enough to keep them well fed, but it's enough to keep them alive. And a high percentage of those are disabled, elderly, or sick. And often it's grandparents with orphans. And many of them live far away, so they can't come often. And a few we go ourselves and take because they're too disabled to come. And then the workers' families, the workers too are suffering, and they're complaining about their wages, and I understand that when I see the prices. So we have 2,184 people that we're trying to help, just with the basic thing of food to keep them alive.
And what are the basic foods that you need to give them?
Okay, we usually give, sometimes we give cooking oil. Sometimes I'm against a bit, but they want sugar awfully bad. They like tea and sugar for breakfast, and sometimes that's all they have. Sometimes they don't even have that. And then mealie meal, which is the real basic thing, which to the uninitiated is ground up corn flour. And,
maize meal?
Yeah, and also soya chunks and beans when we can get them. And sometimes kapinta, which are those funny little dried fish, and sometimes dried vegetables. Sometimes Nemo, which is a bean that's kind of halfway between a potato and a bean in flavor. So these are the kind of basic things we give them as much as we can, but it's not a complete meal for any of them. It's just to help keep them alive, because if we gave everybody complete, we could give so few.
Now tell us about the orphanage.
And I should say that comes, if it was a basic $10 a month to feed someone, and each one of us, we spend a lot more than $10 a month, but if we spent that much on these 2,184, it would be $21,840 a month. I don't have that much.